Well, good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news coming up this hour. The man who filed the FEC complaint against Cori Bush. Now she's under criminal investigation. Dan Backer joins us from the Committee to Defeat the President. That's at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Oh, man. E Jean Carroll. Did you know who she was? She's a columnist, a jury, a judge, a courtroom, awarding her $83 million out of Donald Trump's bank account. She claimed now multiple times that he defamed her by denying that he sexually assaulted her. That is marvelous. And E Jean Carroll's been on tour the last few days, absolutely celebrating all of this, saying she's going to do everything she can to defeat Trump. In fact, she's part of that process right now.
Ms. Carroll, you say it's nothing. You say the emperor has no clothes. The emperor is trying to run for president again.
And right now is leading.
And right now, the polls suggest it's a coin flip. It's very close. Have you heard from Joe Biden's campaign arm about potentially campaigning against the former president, Donald Trump?
No.
Are you interested in doing so?
Do anything I can.
That's a yes.
I will do anything I can, she said. In fact, that's the same thing that the funder of her lawsuit said, a guy by the name of Reid Hoffman. For more on all of this, I want to bring in Cheryl Chumley. She's the opinion editor and host of the Bold and Blunt podcast for the Washington Times and the author of the book Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Cheryl, good to talk to you as always.
Hi, Vince. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So E Jean Carroll is obviously a loopy figure. But this case this week, it was jaw-dropping to hear that she was entitled to $83 million because Donald Trump denied that he sexually assaulted her?
Yeah, and don't forget that gets added to the $5 million of her earlier civil suit against Donald Trump. And look, that right there is the biggest issue. Donald Trump is one side of the story, and it's horrible what's happening to him. But for all of America, no matter what your political stripe is, you ought to be concerned that we're headed down a path in our legal system where denial translates into defamation. So what does this mean going forward? If Donald Trump goes out on the campaign trail and denies, still knowing this woman, denies that these accusations ever occurred, does that mean she's going to dip back into her pool of money provided, as you mentioned, by the CEO of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, an anti-Trumper, a Democrat supporter? Is she going to dip into that pool of money and sue again? I'm sure that's where we're headed.
I mean, yeah, it is maddening to think in anybody's case that denial alone can be the basis for defamation. That seems so crazy to me. I mean, if you've committed a crime against someone, that should be litigated in an actual criminal trial, not a civil one where you deny that you did something wrong and now you owe them money.
Yeah, and you know what? Follow it out, right? Even a little bit more. Say I call this woman right now a loon, and I believe that she's lying. Does that mean that I'm going to be guilty of defamation, right? I mean, the consequences here are phenomenal if you carry out that logic.
Well, I guess it kind of depends. And one of the reasons it depends on who you vote for, probably, Cheryl, or who you seem to vote for. That may play a role in all of this. It's quite obvious that the left has been judge shopping, prosecutor shopping, jury shopping in order to reach these intended outcomes rather than to allow justice to be blind.
Yeah, and it's a shame that the facts, right, get just lost and pushed to the side because look at what Jean Carroll alleged with a cooler head, right? So she alleged that these incidents took place, the sexual abuse, rape is what she wanted to first call it, but she couldn't win on that. So the jury, anonymous jury, by the way, found sexual abuse, but not rape, which is curious. But she alleged this back in 1996. So like any, grieved, bereaved, upset rape victim, she goes home and waits, 25 years until the guy who committed this act on her was president, until she had a new book to promote, until she got the funding from Linked, right? Yes. And then New York passed a law that allowed her to sue because previously, under the current law in New York, she wouldn't have been allowed. So it's very odd.
Right. And it's not like Donald Trump had disappeared and was never heard from again based on her story. Like he went on to riches and fame, and he was everywhere. So if she was planning on jumping in to stop his rise, she could have jumped in at any moment during that career, which of course has been very public.
Yes, it was only until certain conditions were met, right? He was president, and the Democrats detested his policy, and Trump derangement syndrome was on the rise and so forth.
Yes.
And so the political wind shifted, right? And here we are.
So last night, E. Jean Carroll, just to prove the seriousness of all of this, she went on MSNBC's Rachel Maddow to talk about all the fabulous things she's going to be buying now with Donald Trump's money. Take a listen.
You've talked about using some of Trump's money that you're about to get to help shore up women's rights. Do you know what that might be, what that might look like?
Yes, Rachel. Yes.
Tell me.
I had such great ideas for all the good I'm going to do with this money. First thing, Rachel, you and I are going to go shopping. We're going to get completely new wardrobes, new shoes, motorcycle for Crowley, new fishing rod for Robbie. Rachel, what do you want? Penthouse? It's yours,
Nothing.
Rachel. Penthouse and France? You want France? You want to go fishing in France? No? Oh, all right, okay.
That's a joke.
That was her attorney.
Although if me fishing in France could do something for women's rights, I would take the hit. I would obviously take one for the team. All right, let me as if you need persuasion in that regard.
So was this a cause for a big chuckle fest, do you think, Cheryl?
Yeah, it strikes me as a little bit bizarre, right? Especially against the backdrop that we just saw for years ago about Me Too movement,
Right?
Where there were women who were seriously abused, right, by those in positions of power. And let's not forget, we have hanging in the air the whole Jeffrey Epstein so-called investigation, right?
Yes.
Where there are victims out there who are waiting for their days in court, but are being denied, because so much of this information is being concealed and hidden and from view. But yet we have somebody who hates Donald Trump with a political axe to grind.
Yes.
As I said, a book to sell and so forth. And now she goes on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow and giggles about how she's going to buy France and a motorcycle and fishing poles with her ill-gotten gains, is how I put it.
Also,
it's despicable.
And if we're just to compare, apples to apples, presidential candidates to presidential candidates, Donald Trump's primary opponent, Joe Biden, has been accused of a variety of sexual assault. Tara Reid, we know for a fact, worked for the guy. Like the connection between Tara Reid, who made accusations against him, and Joe Biden is a lot more clear than any connection between E. Jean Carroll and a Bergdorf Goodman in the middle of whatever decade and Donald Trump. The relationship between those two is obvious. Also, Ashley Biden's diary has emerged. She's alleged sexual misconduct on the part of Joe Biden when he showered with her. And these are real pieces of evidence that exist. And yet I'm not seeing any court cases moving through. In fact, I think Tara Reid has fled the country.
Not to mention the videos of creepy Joe fondling little girls' hair and so forth, right? So the good news, though, I guess the standard now is if Joe Biden denies any sort of sexual improprieties towards these women, then he can be sued in civil court for defamation, right? Because that seems to be the new standard going forward.
Right. Yeah, I guess that the upside to having a compliant media is that he's never asked about it. So there's no circumstance where he could defame Tara Reid because nobody ever asked. Although Biden did deny it, just so people are clear. Biden denied the assault allegation against Tara Reid, so she, I guess, presumably would have a basis for this. Maybe it depends on the state, because New York moved heaven and earth to change state law to accommodate this left-wing hit job against Trump.
And let's remember, the law changes back, right? It expires, coincidentally, in November. So the whole law-changing thing alone should have been red flags and alarms going off in people's minds, that there was something more than just, a truthful allegation going through an unbiased court, that there was political weaponization of the court system and exploiting this woman, using her to defame and attack Donald Trump as he's campaigning for president.
Can you talk more about the role that left-wing money plays, or more specifically anti-Trump money plays in all of this? We were talking about Reid Hoffman, big tech guy, very rich, the co-founder of LinkedIn. He finances this whole thing. He says publicly that his goal is to destroy Trump. So that's obvious why he's funding this lawsuit. He's also, by the way, funding Nikki Haley's campaign. How important is all of this left-wing money to trying to subvert our republic?
Well, I think it's definitely a question, right, that people should be asking. Just because a left-winger finances some agenda that could actually accomplish something that's in line with that agenda, it doesn't necessarily mean there's a conflict of interest, or it doesn't necessarily mean that lies are being told. But when you look at Reid Hoffman's funding of this woman's case, along with his statements, with all the other curiosities that surround this entire case, you have to come to the conclusion that had it not been for left-wing Reid Hoffman funding her, then it would have been a little bit more difficult for her to proceed, right? And in that vein, there's definitely some sort of bias being shown on the part of these funders when they go after somebody like Jean Carroll to push her case through court.
And the rest of us, I mean, at the very least, should be made aware of it. I mean, you're right. People can spend money the way they want to, but the rest of us don't have to be suckers. We don't have to just go along with it and be like, oh yeah, E Jean Carroll. Reid Hoffman's candidate, Nikki Haley, over the weekend, she was sitting on TV and being like, I trust the jury. She said the jury, she trusts that, Donald Trump sexually assaulted E Jean Carroll and she's entitled to $83 million. I trust them. Like, what? The only reason she says something like that is because she's funded by the same guy E Jean Carroll was funded by.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, everybody can see through that. I expect the appeal to go forward, and like most of the other accusations and allegations against Donald Trump that have come through the years, his so-called impeachable offenses and Russia collusion, I expect that most of this is all going to drop by the wayside. Nothing seems to stick because most of this stuff, in the end, it ends up being made up, fabricated.
Right. But the point of it, as Nancy Pelosi once described, is to be a wrap-up smear. It's to kick up enough dirt and make the guy seem scandalous enough that people don't want to touch him, don't want to vote for him. And then once the truth finally comes out, the damage was done, right?
And a lot of times that's successful for the left, right? That's their go-to playbook, right? Just drum up lies and spins and keep the narrative going with their troll base on social media who don't even read the stories, just read the little 56-character headlines and so forth. But in this particular case with Donald Trump, it's not working, right? And the left is showing its hand, its desperation, because none of this stuff is working. If you look at Donald Trump's rallies versus Joe Biden's support base, it's totally opposite. The swell in America for Donald Trump is strong, and the Democrats cannot beat him on principles, pro-America policies, so they're falling back on their go-to playbook, which is to deceive and lie and so forth and slander.
Yeah, it's totally destructive. And by the way, the latest general election poll between Donald Trump and Joe Biden shows Trump ahead by a point. Emerson survey. So right now, Trump up. But still, somehow it's neck and neck. Worst president of our lifetimes, and somehow it's still neck and neck. Cheryl Chumley, thank you very much, as always, for your excellent work and your time today. Thank you. Let's go to the phones. Chris is calling in from Gainesville now, line 2. Chris, good afternoon. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hello, sir.
I mean, did the Democrats impeach Trump's Homeland Security advisor over kids in cages? No, they didn't. They went right after Trump. Why aren't the Republicans going after Biden, not over Hunter Biden, but over the border and fentanyl? We can impeach Biden and forget Mayorkas. Why should I stand in line for 2 hours voting for Republicans when they act like this?
Well, it comes down to strategy, doesn't it, Chris? It's like, would it be a good use of the House's time specifically to get the outcome of removing Biden from office, right? So at its core,
asterisk in history.
Sure.
The asterisk in his.
Yeah, but the Democrats have so devalued that already. They just threw two at Trump, and like, who cares? It's now, yeah, an asterisk in history is the way they talk about it. But here's the thing, Chris. The Senate is not going to remove Biden. You and I both know that. So what is the effect of an impeachment against Biden? Does it increase his popularity? That's a question. It's done it for every single president of our lifetimes when they subject them to an impeachment. It increases their popularity. Not a good idea. And it's going to be focused everywhere, right? You and I could come up with a list of 50 reasons why Joe Biden deserves to be impeached. From Afghanistan to the border to the fentanyl deaths to the economy. You and I we could chart it out. Here's one area where we could focus fire. Mayorkas. And here's why. Because Mayorkas represents specifically the crimes as it relates to the border. You see? And in that case, this is Democrats at this moment, the reason they are engaged in an all-out panic about the state of the border is because they know that the Mayorkas impeachment is likely to prevail in the House. That even with the scatterbrained Republicans that you and I are so critical, Chris, that they will get together and impeach Mayorkas, get enough votes to do that, and that forces a trial in the Senate on this one issue. It's not scatterbrained. It's focused. It's the border. It's a complete disaster, and it's going to be forced into full view in front of the American people. This is why Biden's freaking out right now. He's all over the place trying to say, oh, the border crisis is real, but it's Trump's fault. We shouldn't let them do that, and we should take their noses and plant it firmly in the pile that they created in our country. So I tend to think that the Mayorkas impeachment is a productive use of their time for that very reason. Again, the Senate not going to remove the guy. The Senate's not going to remove Biden. But the effort here is to get these guys out of office. What's the best strategy for doing that and getting this country back on course? Chris, thanks for thinking about it. It means a lot. I'm with you. These Republicans, they drive me crazy too. We just have to do this the right way. Good afternoon to you. It's 536 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Cori Bush is under investigation right now, a criminal probe, for having misused taxpayer money, campaign money on private security for herself after, of course, calling for defunding the police. And the security guard that she hired happens to be her now husband. Fox News' Harris Faulkner with a report today on the subject.
This breaking news now. Sources have confirmed to Fox News that far-left Democrat squad member Cori Bush of Missouri is now under federal investigation for misusing federal security money. Bush has spent more than $750,000 on private security since she was elected in 2020. Now, remember, these are the same people who defunded the police, but then had to have private security. A watchdog has also demanded that the Federal Election Committee investigate $62,000 of that money that Bush paid to her now husband. He was her boyfriend back then. She hired him to be a security guard from her campaign account. You may remember Congresswoman Bush, one of the big proponents of defunding the police in 2020. I mention it again because look how much she spent to make sure she certainly didn't defund her protection.
Cori Bush stepped up to a microphone today, didn't take any questions, and had this to say.
I hold myself, my campaign, and my position to the highest levels of integrity. I also believe in transparency, which is why I can confirm that the Department of Justice is reviewing my campaign spending on security services. We are fully cooperating with this investigation, and I would like to take this opportunity to outline the facts and the truth. Since before I was sworn into office, I have endured relentless threats to my physical safety and life. As a rank-and-file member of Congress, I am not entitled to personal protection by the House and instead have used campaign funds as permissible to retain security services. I have not used any federal tax dollars for personal security services.
Of course, she has actually done that, too. She has used federal taxpayer money. It's well documented. Joining us now is Dan Backer. He's counsel to the Committee to Defeat the President. And was responsible for his organization filing an FEC complaint against Cori Bush for this very activity. Dan, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
What do you make of today's news?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's high time the Democrats are held accountable to basic standards of how do you run our public money. I mean, to take federal security dollars and use them for your personal security when calling to defund the police is crazy. And then to take campaign dollars and do it is, nuts. And the craziest part is there's a legal way for her to have done so, and she just decided to completely ignore it and just go ahead and pay her boo.
Did you fall off? I'm going to see if you're still here. Are you still with us, Dan?
I'm still with you. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, I hear you okay now. So you said the craziest thing about her is this?
The craziest thing is that there's a perfectly legal way she could have gone to the FEC, like a lot of other Congress critters have, requested an advisory opinion request, and said, hey, I have threats. These are the threats. Can I use campaign funds for these security measures? Plenty have done it, and she could have as well, but she didn't. So we only have her word that there's these threats. No one's ever seen them. No one's ever gotten access to any of this information.
Right.
We actually FOIA'd to try to get some of that information, didn't get any of it. And so, I don't know. It sounds to me like a good made-up excuse to hire her boyfriend, now husband.
Yeah, okay, so that's what I want to get to. So if it wasn't involving somebody who is now a relative of hers, her husband, if it was involving some outside group, you might say, okay, maybe there's some merit to this. Like, most campaigns want to spend money on actually winning, right? They want to spend it on advertising or the people who make the campaign operate, getting the mailers out. And so she's spending money on security that detracts from the campaign goal, unless she's enriching herself or her boyfriend or her husband. This adds a whole new level of corruption to it, Dan.
Absolutely. And the crazy thing here, I love saying it's the craziest thing. There's so much crazy here. So her boyfriend, now husband, is not licensed to provide security services in St. Louis, where they live, or in the District of Columbia, where they live when they're in town. Which means if they're paying him with federal election dollars for a service he may not legally provide, they're violating federal election law. You can't do that. It's illegal. Or they weren't doing that, in which case they filed fake FEC reports, which is 3 other unrelated felonies. And so they got themselves caught in a lie. And honestly, nobody would have thought to look at this except that they're so brazen. They chose to do it with her actual boyfriend, now husband, as opposed to like some security name firm.
Yes.
And that, so the arrogance and recklessness involved in this effort to steal public money is ultimately what's going to hoist them on the road in petard.
All right, let me play some more audio for you, Dan Backer, because it sounds like she attacks you in your organization without mentioning your name. And then she also says that actually her husband has extensive security experience. Take a listen.
In recent months, right-wing organizations have lodged baseless complaints against me, peddling notions that I have misused campaign funds to pay for personal security services. That simply is not true. I have complied with all applicable laws and House rules and will continue to prioritize the rules that govern us as federal elected officials. In particular, the nature of these allegations have been around my husband's role on the campaign. In accordance with all applicable rules, I retained my husband as part of my security team to provide security services because he has had extensive experience in this area and is able to provide the necessary services at or below fair market rate.
Dan Backer, your reaction to that?
Well, we looked up Mr. Merritt, and again, not registered to provide security in D.C. or St. Louis or anywhere else. He runs a moving van company. He was in the Army, so he may have some military training. We don't know what. We tried to get his records. We haven't heard back from the military. Surprising. And so even if he had some form of security training, she's basically admitting she's committing a crime in 2 different jurisdictions. He is. She hired a guy who's unlicensed to provide security when he's unlicensed to provide security to provide her security. And that's exactly the problem here, is you're using federal campaign dollars for a purpose that is unlawful. It's a flat-out violation of federal election law, and they should know better. And when we caught them doing this, they immediately went out and changed the descriptions on the payments to the husband in the next FEC reports. And so now they're just calling it some sort of general services consulting sort of role. But that means they were lying before and filing false FEC reports before when they were saying he was providing security.
Yeah, at one point they were referring to what she was giving to her husband as security services, and then subsequently referring to them as wage expenses.
Yep, that was it.
Yeah, and so they keep manipulating the way they represent it. You wouldn't have to do that unless you were sensitive to the fact that this is a big problem for you.
Yeah, and the tragedy here is if they said, you know what, we should not have paid him for security services. We realized that was inappropriate, and we're going to stop doing that. Nobody would have cared. The FEC would have dismissed it. People make mistakes. It's fine. Right. They didn't do that. They double down because they're arrogant and they're cocky and they don't think the law applies to them. And so then they decided to change the description. But so he's either still providing services illegally, or they were lying before and he was never providing those services. It's a catch-22. Either way, they're breaking the law.
In your view, how much trouble is she in? How meaningful is this investigation?
Well, again, because they didn't just come clean in the first place, it's always the cover-up. You've got the knowing and willful false reporting of FEC reports, and there's actually 3 felonies there. They've prosecuted and convicted and thrown people in jail for this the last several years. So you could be looking at potentially a year or 2, substantial fines, and fines on the FEC front. The reality is, I don't know how much appetite a Biden DOJ has to hold her to the same standards of the poor schmucks they have prosecuted.
Yeah.
This is pretty serious stuff because, again, they didn't come clean. They didn't own up. They double down and try to hide their crimes.
Let me, I do want to reflect on the politics of all of this, though, because she has indeed called for making the American people less safe. Meanwhile, she's been using their money to pay for her security. Here's Cori Bush back in 2021 making those arguments at the very same time.
You can't get that off. I'm going to make sure I have security because I know I have had attempts on my life and I have too much work to do. There are too many people that need help right now for me to allow that. So if I end up spending $200,000, if I spend $10 more on it, you know what? I get to be here to do the work. So suck it up, and defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police and put that money into social safety nets because we're trying to save lives.
Every time I hear that clip, I think, can she hear herself? Does she hear the two things that she just stringed together?
Not at all. And, I listen to her and I'm immediately concerned about her mental health because it sounds like she has a messianic persecution complex.
Oh, my gosh.
People are out to get her. They're out to kill her. But no one has ever seen any evidence of this. Zach, her lawyer, when we started filing these complaints and then supplements, her lawyer, who, funny enough, clerked for me like 10, 15 years ago, sent a letter on her behalf saying, hey, these statements are all false. She's had actual threats, blah, blah. No actual facts or evidence in his letter, just assertions. And the reality is she didn't go to the FEC where she absolutely would have gotten funding for whatever security she wanted if she had legitimate threats. She didn't. There's no analysis by the House Sergeant at Arms or Capitol Police. There's none of that. So it's just her perception that she is so valuable and so important and must be saved.
Right, and so members of Congress aren't entirely defenseless, right? If they're subjected to meaningful threats, there are places they can go to, and there are security options available to them if they rise to a level that the government thinks, okay, this is a real issue, right?
Yeah, and in fact, the FEC has been very lenient on this. There's been a whole series of advisory opinions issued for Republicans and Democrats alike for substantial improvements in home security and security services for members of Congress because of, we live in an ugly environment right now, and it's reasonable. But she didn't go through that process because it requires one of two things, actually producing evidence or having the Capitol Police or Sergeant at Arms produce evidence. And my sense is that none of this exists because it's all in her head. Well, it's like Jussie Smollett without the fake, the fake guys.
Yeah, that's right. They didn't, but she did hire a buddy for this one. So here's the thing. I mean, the more people you get involved, the more authorities you get involved, the less, the harder it is for you to hire your husband to be your security guy. I would say that might be one of the impediments.
Well, you can't hire family members. I mean, it's as a political attorney, I will tell. There's things you tell your clients. You don't hire your family. You just don't. It's stupid. You're going to get beat up over it. It's like taking candidate salary. It's just dumb. But people do it all the time, particularly on the left. And if he was actually licensed to provide security, there'd be no issue here.
Right.
If he'd actually gone and gotten a license, that's the other part. It's been a year. Why hasn't he gone and gotten a license to provide security? That would have solved all of this. So what's going on there that he can just freewheel around and nobody cares? And it's probably because he's not actually providing security. He's just getting paid. He's on the company dime.
Yeah, and they're thinking they can get away with it. So why would they even go through the hassle? Hey, Dan, really appreciate it. Dan Backer with the Committee to Defeat the President. Thank you very much for your dogged attention to this story and your time today. Really appreciate that, sir.
Thanks for having us.
It's Dan Backer. One more thing from Cori Bush. A couple years back, she was approached. I think this is 2021 as well. That audio I just played for you where it's unbelievable. That audio is so good. Just from a pure entertainment standpoint, where she's like, I need my own security. I'm going to take all this money from the donors and the taxpayers. I'm going to pay for security. But the rest of you need to lose your cops. I'm going to defund the police. She says within the same breath. I don't even think she paused to take a breath to say all of that. A reporter chasing her down on Capitol Hill around the same time frame, I believe, asking her why she wants to defund the police while she's using donor and taxpayer money to pay for her own security. Here's how she didn't answer.
Congresswoman, if you support defunding the police, why are you paying for your own security? I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you have any comment on why you want to defund the police, but you're paying for your own security? You want to take resources away, but you're providing them for yourself?
She must have had some sort of moment of realization that this is a very stupid position, so she kept her mouth shut. Now, the patronizing attitude that the voters are just too stupid to realize how good Joe Biden is, it pervades everything. It's all over the place. What was it? Stephen Colbert earlier this week was defending the Biden economy. How pathetic do you have to be a comedian on a major television network to defend the least popular president of our lifetimes and say that the crappy economy is actually fantastic? You're just rubes for not understanding. And then everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's great. How embarrassing. How embarrassing. I was amused today. There are some Democrats arguing on Twitter how they're concerned that young people don't realize, young voters, who, by the way, keep showing up in polling, are actually much more inclined to support Trump than they are Biden right now. It's freaking the left out, for real. They're bugged by the fact they say young voters don't realize how much Joe Biden has done for them on the climate. And of course, when the left talks about the climate, they're not actually talking about helping the environment at all. When you and I think of helping the environment, we think about picking up litter. Have you noticed? Has your community been clean lately? Have things improved? Has the Biden presidency reduced the amount of litter in your neighborhood? No, it has not. In fact, I bet you it's increased wherever you live. Certainly it has in my community. A lot more litter these days than there used to be. A lot more social disorder for sure. Things are messier, aren't they? And so the idea that the left lays any claim to the environment is ridiculous. In fact, it's the people who use the earth themselves for their livings that tend to be the best environmentalists, the hunters, the farmers, the people who actually care about the natural world, who can tell the difference between various trees, know what brackish water is, like if you just have to know anything at all about the environment. And the left doesn't. They're like captured in these like ridiculous bureaucratic caves in college campuses. So they're arguing about all this. How come the young people don't know all the great stuff Biden's done? And a professor who teaches kids to be, leftist hacks writes, a very serious concern. I teach climate policy to college students, many of whom identify as climate activists. And when I ask for a show of hands of who has ever heard of the Inflation Reduction Act, there are very few hands that go up. I find it so perplexing and frankly scary. Now, let me pause for a moment. Did you detect the major problem in that claim? He asks the green activists, who here is aware of the Inflation Reduction Act? And a bunch of them are like, oh, I don't know. And then these Democrats sit around and they wonder why, man, our messaging's not working. Well, let me begin with the obvious. Your stupid bill is called the Inflation Reduction Act. It wasn't called the Green New Deal, the big green spending bill, the take over the climate, the change the weather bill. It wasn't called any of those things. It was called the Inflation Reduction Act. So if you'd like some messaging advice, maybe stop starting with lies as the title of your legislation. Maybe then people might know what you're up to. It's free. I'm not even charging for that. Just free advice for the left. Go away. That's the other free advice I'm giving them today. Hey, the great one, Mark Levin, up next right here on the legendary WMAL.